In The Wartime Sisters by Lynda Cohen Loigman, the battlefields of World War II are a distant backdrop to the Cold War raging quietly between two sisters who've been at odds since childhood.
I really wanted to explore this idea of roles in a family. I think that those roles that you get assigned when you're young are really hard to break free from.
In the case of Ruth and Millie Kaplan, those chains follow them from their family's tiny apartment in Brooklyn to the sprawling grounds of the Springfield Armory in Massachusetts, where their lives become entwined in the war effort of 1942. The story's setting is a tribute to Loigman's own hometown and her mother, who moved there from Brooklyn as a teenager with her family. But when Loigman began writing, the Armory was a footnote.
And then I started researching the Springfield Armory, and I just, I didn't come up for air for like a week, because it was so fascinating and so rich with details and just like different characters, and I don't know, my mind just went spinning, and then I decided to set my story in that time period.
Loigman's acclaimed first novel, The Two-Family House, also returned to the past. The story, which explores a crippling secret between the wives of two brothers in 1950s Brooklyn, became a Goodreads Choice Awards semifinalist and a BuzzFeed Most Buzzed About book. Loigman wrote it while raising her children and studying writing after leaving her first career as a lawyer.
It's still amazing to me that anyone wants to talk to me about the stuff that I made up in my head. But it's great, and I feel very lucky that I have that, because I think at this point in life, like my daughter is off at college, my son will go in a couple years, and this is something that it's my thing, it's mine, and I love it.
Find out how Loigman made that happen in this edition of First Person, One-on-One with Lynda Cohen Loigman, presented by St. Louis County Library and HEC Media. Lynda, thank you so much for joining us. We're so happy to have you here. So this is your second novel. Came out this week. Is that exciting?
It's really exciting. I think the first novel was all excitement and all joy, because I didn't think anyone would ever read it. It was just, I didn't know anything. So I didn't know enough to be nervous at all. With this book, when it's your second book, you kind of know enough, just enough. Not that I know so much, but I know just enough to be a little bit nervous. So it was a little bit more nerve-wracking the second time around. But still really exciting, but kind of, with the first one, I just thought, okay, like that was just getting to the pub day was just like, I was done. Like it was like, I've done it.
You climbed the mountain.
Right. And this one, I really want people, you want people to like it, because I want to write another one. So you want, you kind of want to try to build your audience each time and just hope that people like the stories that you're telling. And so it's different, but it's still very fun.
And now you have fans too.
Well, it's funny, I don't know if I have fans. Okay. Thank you.
You do.
Thank you.
I'm a fan.
It's funny. Well, when I was waiting for my first book to be published, my agent, who was this very lovely woman, Marley Rusoff, we were talking about my second book, and she said something like, well, your readers will blah, blah, blah. And I said, I don't have any readers. Like, no one has read my book. She said, but you will. It have readers. So it was that kind of idea.
And the reviews have been fabulous.
They've been good, yeah. I think people are really fascinated with the World War II era. And I did try, my book is, I hope it's a little bit different. I hope it's a little bit unusual, because it's really not about the war at all. It's about the home front and what people were, especially what women were doing to further the war effort. And it's about two sisters specifically, but it takes into account a lot of different women who worked and lived at the Springfield Armory. So it is a different kind of war story.
Was it easier or harder to write the second?
It was very different. The first novel was a story that I had been carrying around in my head for over 10 years. So I knew the characters so well. I knew everything about them. They were like old friends, that I carried around with me. The second novel, I had to really write it a lot faster than the first one. The first one, I wasn't in a rush because, again, I didn't think anyone would read it or that anything would happen with it. So I just took my sweet time. You know, it took me about 5 years to write the first book. And then with the second book, it was a different kind of thing because, I had an obligation to finish it by a certain day. And so that made it a different sort of experience. But I think I kind of needed that the second time around because I didn't want to keep dilly-dallying, it was good to have something to write towards. But I did need to take a lot of my writing time isn't just writing, it's kind of thinking time. And I think, my kids make fun of me because I'll just sit around in my pajamas thinking, and they're like, oh, mom's working, ha, ha, ha. But I really do need to, think. I just need that time to get to know my characters. And I think the first time around, it was such a luxury to have all that time. So the second time around, I needed to, it was like speed dating. I had to get to know them much more quickly.
Tell us about the Wartime Sisters.
So it is a home front story, but it's also a family story. It's a story of two sisters, Ruth and Millie, and they're very different. From the day that Ruth brings Millie home from the hospital, Millie's the younger one, they're just kind of at odds with each other. And not to oversimplify, but people think of them in certain ways. They have certain roles. So Millie is kind of the flaky one, the pretty one, the irresponsible one, the overly emotional one. And Ruth is the more serious, responsible, studious, academically inclined sister. And she feels very burdened by the role, Ruth does, that she's been given, and doesn't really like that caretaking role that she has. And they become estranged. A tragedy strikes in their family, and Ruth really wants to leave Brooklyn, where the two of them have grown up, because she feels like she's lived under Millie's shadow her whole life. And she marries a very kind man who is really, truly the first man who has ever really seen her and not walked into the house and taken one look at her sister and kind of followed that direction. And he gets a job offer at the Springfield Armory because he's a scientist, and they're working on weapons for the war, even before the U.S. has joined the war. And she jumps at the chance to get out of Brooklyn. But she leaves her sister behind in a very not nice way, in a less than perfect state, with tragedy just having developed in their family. And it's not nice what she does. It's just sort of objectively a not nice or kind thing to do. And she doesn't really care. She wants to get out from under her sister. And 5 years later, Millie ends up in Springfield. She has nothing. She's kind of lost everything. Her husband is gone. He's gone missing in the war. And she comes with her little 2-year-old son to Springfield to stay with her sister because she can't really afford to live on her own anymore. And she knows that she's not really welcome, and it's a very tough reunion, and there are secrets that they've been keeping from each other, and they kind of all come to light, and the tension just kind of keeps growing between them. So
this is such an intimate story. I feel like you could really feel the things that were going through their minds in certain scenes, and the low-grade tension.
I think I'm really drawn to those small moments. I think when my children were in elementary school, they talked to them about writing about small moments in English class. And I think that phrase has always stayed with me. And I think that those small moments are so powerful. And because I think that that's what we all relate to. You relate to trying to help someone cook dinner in a kitchen that isn't yours, and when they're annoyed with you, and you feel that they, you don't know where the spoons are, and you're looking through those feelings of insecurity and that tension that develops just in these little moments, these domestic moments, that I think everyone feels like they've been through that. And I do like a slow boil kind of tension. I'm not really one for crazy big dramatic scenes. I like it to develop slowly.
You can see them inching toward each other, falling back, the real incremental things that happen.
Yeah. And I think I really wanted to explore this idea of roles in a family. We get assigned these roles when we're young. And this one is the klutzy one, or this one, and I always say, if you're 6 years old and you spill your cranberry sauce at Thanksgiving dinner, do your aunts and uncles always think of you as the klutzy one? And when you're 30 years old and you're a ballerina and you're the most graceful person, do they still think of you as the klutzy one because you spilled your cranberry sauce when you were 6? And I kind of think they do. I think that those roles that you get assigned when you're young are really hard to break free from. And, I wanted to explore that idea. And can we ever break free from them? And Do the people who have known us the longest really know us the best? Or do they really not?
It was interesting too, because we were able to see them go from this environment where they were first assigned those roles in Brooklyn in their parents' apartment to this brand new environment where for Ruth, some things had changed in terms of her circumstances in her life. Yeah. And for Millie, unbeknownst to Ruth, some things had really changed dramatically in her life too. And here they are in this brand new sort of landscape, and yet things follow you.
Yeah, they do. And I think it's kind of, their parents treated them differently too. And so when they're in Springfield, their parents aren't there anymore, to kind of instigate certain feelings between the two of them. But damage was done a long time ago. And I think it's also their mother specifically had certain ideas of what their lives would be like. And she always thought that Ruth's life would be very dull and not glamorous at all. And that Millie was going to marry this very wealthy man and just have this very glamorous, elegant life. And that's just not how it turns out at all. It's almost the opposite. So it's interesting to see them both navigate that and, what the change of fortune sort of brings.
And this is set during a really exciting time and pivotal time, really, for women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so originally I wasn't going to set it. It wasn't going to be a World War II story at all. Originally, I just had this idea of writing about sisters in transition. And it was really because of my mom and her early life. She grew up in Brooklyn, and she moved to Springfield when she was 18 years old. And she actually stayed behind for a little bit, not for 5 years the way Millie does, but for a few months because she was in her senior year of high school. So I knew I wanted to write about those themes, kind of the sisters and being disappointed with a new, smaller, much less exciting city and being left behind and all of that entailed. But I had this one idea that I was going to have one character with a backstory of having worked at the Springfield Armory during World War II. And even though it was just in my mind a few pages, I had the research that I had to do because of what I didn't know enough about what kind of job that woman would have had. And what could I say about that backstory for her? And then I started researching the Springfield Armory, and I just, I didn't come up for air for like a week, because it was so fascinating and so rich with details and just like different characters. And I don't know, my mind just went spinning. And then I decided to set my story in that time period and to use the armory as the place where my characters would live and to add these two other women as main characters to the story.
And on your website, you share some of the photos that inspired you, and it's so neat to see them.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to visit the armory 3 times and walk around with the curator. But when I started to research it, it's just, I thought it was this one single building. I thought it was just a big factory, and it's not. It was a huge campus with these beautiful homes, beautiful buildings. The commanding officer's house was this beautiful mansion, and there were gardens everywhere, and a rose arbor, and tennis courts, and a swimming pool, and, it was kind of like a country club on one side of the street. And then on the other side of the street were all the factory buildings. And so in my head, the first time I walked through it with the curator, even though a lot of it isn't there anymore, but the first time I really walked the grounds, it was so important to seeing my characters. And there was like opposite places, the sort of juxtaposition of that beautiful, natural, like bucolic landscape, and then these buildings where guns are being made was so interesting. And it, like, the sisters are opposites, and so it helped me figure out who belongs to what world and how, and that was really crucial to shaping the characters.
They both grow up so much during this process, and the setting and the circumstances and the time really contribute to that, and that they lived in this insular kind of community in Brooklyn in their small apartment with their parents and, protected and that. And here in Springfield, they're meeting the world in a way because, as you said, so many people were there to work from different backgrounds. Yeah. And it was almost like a trip abroad for them in some ways.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just like a very foreign place when Ruth first gets there and when Millie comes too. And, they get there and it just, even though they're working at the Armory, which at its height in World War II had like almost 12,000 people working there. And of that 12,000, 43% were women. So that gives you some idea of like how many women were there. But to them, still, it's still like a very small, quiet city, and it's still like very green, and like it's not Brooklyn at all. But they do meet a lot of different people, and I think mostly like people who just didn't know them when they were young. That's what Ruth craves when she first gets there. She craves that kind of separation from her family.
Freedom from who she was.
Yeah, she's Ruth, and yes, she's Arthur's wife. She's, she has her husband, and she has these twin, they're pretty much babies when she first gets there, these young girls. But she is not Millie's sister there. Nobody knows about her sister. And then when her sister arrives, it's just like this feeling of dread. It's just like, oh. And then people start asking her about her sister. And in particular, there's one really not nice character who takes a strong dislike to Millie right away. Grace Peabody.
Oh,
yep.
Right.
Yep, exactly. So that's, that it all kind of comes crashing down. Like people didn't even know that she had a sister, and that's how she liked it.
Do your characters change in unexpected ways at all during your writing process, or do you have a very clear vision of where they're going and who they are? Do they, in this case, like, did they surprise you in any way? Some of
They do, yeah. I mean, they don't surprise me. They become more of who they are, kind of, And
do you get to know them better?
Yeah, as I get to know them better, I have like a rough map for them, where I want them to be, like certain marking points in the story, where I want them to be, what I want them, how I want them to develop emotionally. But things come to me, just like you get ideas. I get a lot of ideas when I'm driving in my car, or, when you're in the shower, or you're drifting off to sleep at night, and you get ideas from more of those small scenes, like more of those moments when, you think back and more of the backstory and how kind of it all comes together.
You've said too that your mother's family and stories of growing up in Brooklyn and her sisters are a major inspiration point.
They are, yeah. I mean, I think my mother was a very strong woman, and her sisters are, I'm very close to both my aunts now still. And my grandmother was like just such an amazing woman, and she had all these funny stories and funny sayings that she used to say. She was a character. And so I don't know, I feel like I could write about them forever. Like there's a lot to say. And someone asked me once about family secrets, because I love to write about that. And when I was young, my mother and my grandmother, like when they didn't want me to know what they were saying, they used to speak in Yiddish because I couldn't understand Yiddish. So they would speak in Yiddish, and because they didn't want me to know what they were talking about. And I feel like that generation really kept secrets much more closely, even though there weren't really any juicy secrets to keep in my family. But still, like there are things now, like I did not find out that my mother stayed behind in Brooklyn to finish high school until like a couple years ago. And I never knew that. And it's not that that's really a secret, but it's just, she
kind of a big thing, right?
Yeah, she just didn't tell me things. So I feel like I'm still finding out things about people, like my mother, that I'm very close to, or, she passed away, but obviously I was close to her. So I feel like there are things that I'm still learning, and there just wasn't transparency with everything. So I think that was more of that time period. And I like having that in stories because it kind of creates this cloudiness, and I like to write in the clouds, like in the cloudiness and the murkiness, like to not have everything be so clear all the time. So.
Do you always know where your stories are going, how they're going to end? The Wartime Sisters has a really shocking ending that I actually did not see coming.
I do generally know, yeah. I'm not one of those people who just, like, flies by the seat of her pants. There's like the pantser and the plotter kind of ideas of writing, and I don't really outline. I kind of just keep it all in my head, and sometimes I make lists of scenes that are going to get me to those marking points, but I don't really outline so carefully.
At what point in your childhood or even your life did you start to think of yourself as a writer, or think, I want to be a writer?
I didn't really. I mean, it seemed, I didn't know any writers. It seemed like a very far away thing. It seemed like a thing that very important, very lucky people got to do, like not like a thing that I would get to do. I wrote a lot of like really terrible poetry, and I used to love, I always wanted to write songs, like Broadway show tunes, like a Broadway musical, but I don't play an instrument or play the piano or anything, so that's like
few obstacles.
Yeah, I had some serious obstacles, so that was out of the question. But like, I had this, someone asked me about this, but I had a book that I was given maybe when I was 10 years old, and I had seen a local production of West Side Story, and so I had this book, and it was this like old paperback that had the script for West Side Story, and then it had the play of Romeo and Juliet, and it was side by side. And so, but that, I don't know where that book came from, but I was obsessed with it. I still have it, actually, because it listed all the song lyrics as well as all the dialogue. And then when I saw the song lyrics, there wasn't Google then, like you couldn't print out song lyrics, and I didn't really ever buy albums that young, so I didn't see song lyrics printed out like on the inside of an album jacket or anything. But I saw them all printed out, and those songs from West Side Story are so, the language is so beautiful for some of them and so clever for some of the more comic ones. And I was really obsessed with those songs as stories, and I don't know, that was like my first desire to write. I wanted to be able to write like that.
And did you read a lot growing up?
Yes, I read a lot. I read all the time. Yeah. And I used to be like the first one, like at the summer library reading wall, where they take a picture of you with a Polaroid and put your face up and, do like all the reading challenges and stuff.
So when you graduated with your degree.
And then I went to law school. I went to law school right away. I know. I don't really know, why did I go to law school? I don't know. I didn't really want to be a lawyer. My mom was very nervous about my brother and I finding jobs, and she was very much like, you can be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, and I kind of thought there were three careers. My brother's a doctor. I became the lawyer. And I didn't really ever love law school, but practicing law, I worked like in a big New York City law firm for about 3 years, and then a more medium-sized New York City law firm. And the nice thing is, like, I got to work with really smart people and really caring, nice people. And I got to do a lot of really, it was interesting. It was definitely interesting work. It's just a tough pace to maintain. And I was a trust and estates lawyer, so I loved I liked the fact that the clients that we had were individuals and they were people instead of corporations, or big companies, and that they had real people problems. They were planning their estates. They were, you're writing their wills, trying to figure out who would take care of their children if something terrible happened to them. Or on the flip side, we were administering an estate, and it was kind of dealing with someone when they're in that first beginning part of loss, and it's very emotional sometimes, or sad, or contentious if there are people fighting, or whatever it is. And I loved kind of that part of it. And it sounds awful to say I loved people fighting, but I didn't love people fighting. There was a narrative to it. There was a story to it. I felt like I could do something to ease it. You fall into like a little bit of a therapist role a little bit, and I liked that part of it, but I didn't love the actual legal part. I was really happy to talk to everyone, but I didn't want to research the tax law about it. So that was the tough part. How
did you transition out of that then and into?
I had my daughter, and then I worked part-time until she was about 2. And when we moved out of the city, we live about an hour north of the city, and my husband still commutes to the city, but I just didn't want to be I wanted to take some time to get to know the people in our new community when we moved and to make some friends. And so I stopped for a little bit, then I went back for a little bit, then I was a legal recruiter part-time for about 5 years. And then my mom passed away, and then I turned 40, and then I knew that I wanted to write that story that I had been thinking about. So that was when I started taking a class, and then I started writing The Two-Family House.
When you sort of gave yourself permission to say, hey, I'm going to try this.
It was kind of like, if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? I think my mom was 63 when she died. She was really young. So,
she didn't really get a retirement.
No. So, that was a wake-up call, you
do it now.
Do it now.
I imagine too, in a way, second act success like this too, where you have the maturity and sort of the life experience to really both appreciate it and sort of navigate it.
It's a really special, lucky thing. It is, because first of all, I turned 50 in October. So, and now I've made I've made so many new friends, and like, how many new friends do you make after you're 50? You know, so just other authors who have been so kind and so much fun to get to know, and that's been a really special thing. But also just like, I got to come here today, you know, and like leave my house and get on a plane like a big grown-up person. You know, like, I mean, it's fun to travel, and it's fun to talk to readers, and I mean, it's amazing to me that anyone wants to talk to me about the stuff that I made up in my head. But it's great, and I feel very lucky that I have that, because I think at this point in life, you know, like, my daughter is off at college, my son will go in a couple years, and this is something that, it's my thing, you know, it's mine, and I love it. And I never could have said that about law, that I loved it, but I really love this. So I love talking about books, whether they're my books or somebody else's books, and I love just sitting and trying to think of another story, and I love talking about stories and how to make stories more interesting, and I mean, I really do love it. So I feel really lucky that I found something that I love. I didn't find it for a long time, but I found it. So it's like a great like flash of, it's like winning the lottery, kind of.
Lynda, thank you so much for joining us. It's been so much fun to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.